Pasito tum tum, pasito tum tum, pasito tum tum, pasito tum tum.
Hello, this is WIllie. Welcome to a classic modern review. The Pawnbroker. Life is beautiful. What do they have in common? They're related to the Holocaust. So this is in remembrance of the Holocaust that was actually 2 weeks ago, and I'm barely talking about it because procrastination sucks. But I'm still giving my thoughts on The Pawnbroker. This was the first film to address the Holocaust 20 years later after the event. Some directors would turn down the movie for how touchy the subject about Jews and the Holocaust was at that time, such as Franco Sefirelli, known for directing Romeo and Juliet and the Jesus of Nazareth miniseries, and Karel Zeiss, known for directing The French Lieutenant's Woman. Even Stanley Kubrick turned it down, not because it was controversial, but because he didn't find it interesting. Yeah, because the guy who found this to be interesting found this to be boring. Finally, Sidney Lumet stepped up to direct the film, known for some of his classics as Serpico, 12 Angry Men, and Dog Day Afternoon. And surprisingly, out of most old school movies to this date, this one still holds up from a technical view and acting wise. This is a great looking picture that digs into the psyche of the man who is living but inside is dead, and the movie tries to find out if there's still life left in him. The story begins with a Holocaust survivor, played by Roger Steiner, who resides in New York, where he runs a pawn shop with an ecstatic Puerto Ricanian student of his, played by Jamie Sanchez. Through time, he becomes cold and bitter for all the things that happened to him, while everyone in the neighborhood tries to cheer him up, or at least make him feel something, but little success is made, until flashbacks of his past show up tormenting him during his difficult times with pimps, prostitutes, and corruption in the city. What stands out the most of this movie is how gorgeously shot it is from a visual standpoint and psychological, to see how the main character's life transpires as the story progresses. I love how the jazz soundtrack works with the cinematography to give it a New York feel, being a crowded city and at times being dirty, but also bright and flashy. The acting for the most part still holds up to this date. You would normally expect everyone to be sad and crying when it comes to the topic of the Holocaust, which there is, but it's handled in a subtle way and not so melodramatic. The supporting actors are good. While they serve other subplots, it doesn't lose focus of what the story is about. On top of that, it adds this theme of corruption, how it's everywhere in the world, from the biggest to the smallest scenarios, and you can't escape it as it is depicted in the life of the main character who only wants peace, but he can't find it anywhere else. Despite being a black and white movie, it looked like a colorful picture of New York thanks to the cinematography, but only depicting the dark side of the city during that time period. I didn't realize that Rod Steiner wore makeup in this movie to look older, and he looked actually convincing for a 40-year-old actor at that time to look 60. This was the film that launched them to A-list celebrity status, earning him a Golden Globe Award, even though he was already known for his role on A Waterfront, which I haven't seen yet, but I've heard that it's really good because it has Marlon Brando, you get it because he was in Godfather. I've only seen a few movies of his where he plays small roles, such as the priest from The Amityville Horror and as Pontius Pilate from Jesus of Nazareth. But by far, this is my favorite Rod Steiner movie that I've seen him play because of how much there is of his character to dig in. The Holocaust is viewed by his own perspective of how he experienced it and was ruined by it. In the movie, he starts off quiet, settled, and nothing seems to bother him, until he becomes louder and angrier and more expressive, hurting those that try to help him and tossing them aside without realizing there are people around him that are inspired and influenced by his hard behavior as his Puerto Rican student. Now, to be this unsympathetic, they managed to not make me hate him and actually feel sorry for the character and go along to see what happens to him in the end. The editing in this film works so good with the cinematography to give some beautifully looking shots of the main character's life before the Holocaust and understand what's going on in his mind when all these flashbacks return back to torture him, and for us viewers, make us feel uncomfortable by viewing what he's going through. The whole film is about searching inside the character if there's still any good left in him after losing his wife and having his life destroyed and embittered. For him, having no emotions is an escape from the traumatic events of his past. He views the shop as his whole life, his whole purpose. Money is the only thing he finds worth living for, and trust me, this isn't the only stereotype in this movie. Outside of money, everyone and everything means nothing to him. It's made very clear when he talks about his Jewish past to his student without mentioning the Bible in that great passionate scene. The pawn shop plays as an escape for the protagonist to hold from having any feelings or care for the world without realizing that it resembles more like a prison as a concentration camp. And I gotta say, the pawn shop looked gorgeous for all the details they put in it with the cages and the heavy shadows that made it seem like a character itself. But the eye catcher of this shop was the cages surrounding the place, like if it was a metaphor of the character being emotionally locked up from showing any compassion or care for anyone else except his job and make good honest money. But as he later finds out that the money of his job comes from what he would not consider as an honest job, tears his belief system apart and breaks him down, leaving him empty and fully realizing how depressingly lonely he truly is. I also wanted to add in a documentary called One Day in Auschwitz about a Jewish woman who tells her story to a couple of young teenagers how she survived in the Nazi concentration camp. One of the things she'd said in order to survive, and I'm paraphrasing, is that they couldn't cry or show any emotion when someone like their family or friends was killed and they had to be called, or else that meant dead for them. And once it was actually over, they could now cry for their beloved ones they lost. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but what if this character was still in a state of survival? What if he felt like he was still in a concentration camp and doesn't allow showing any feelings for what happened to him, fearing that he can get hurt again? But as it turns out in the end, without spoiling the movie, he allows to show a little compassion and emotion for those surrounding him. It briefly talks about the themes and expresses from the main character's point of view the sadness and guilt of many Jewish survivors that felt they couldn't do anything to save their beloved ones, and from the American side expressing their own guilt for not helping them as fast enough. It's really a deep condolences for those who suffered, showing from both American and Jewish side regret and sympathy for the millions who died, and from those who survived but may have never recovered emotionally afterwards. This is a story that addresses a big historical event at a time when many did not know how to address it because they were afraid they might offend someone. And I think it does a really good job on addressing the issue. It expresses how this was a tragedy that should never be forgotten for the sake memory of those who lost their lives in those terrible days. The pawnbroker digs into the scars of the wounded ones to see if there's still hope for a new light. It's a masterpiece for how good looking the cinematography is and how emotional it is, showing the dark and grim side of people, but also the good and bright side of them. It's a story about redemption, and this is a shop I am sure delighted to visit someday. I give it an 8.5 out of 10 stars. So, have you seen The Pawnbroker? Did you like it? Did you not like it? You can comment down below and give your own personal thoughts on the movie. Well guys, tune in next time because I'll be giving my thoughts on the Oscar-winning movie, Life is Beautiful. So for now, that's it for today. Ciao.